What's up, guys? Today we are on the 13th shelf of my wrestling collection. We're on Vengeance 2004. That was an okay pay-per-view, not the greatest. Chris Benoit was the world champion at this time, which is why it wasn't, the greatest pay-per-view. But he had Victoria versus Molly Holly, which was a solid match considering at the time a lot of the women couldn't wrestle. You had Rhino and Tajiri versus Jonathan Coachman and Garrison Cade. That was kind of a stupid little angle, I thought. You had La Resistance versus Eugene and Ric Flair. Eugene was the nephew of Eric Bischoff, so they were trying to make Evolution butter up Eric Bischoff to get Triple H's title match. So Ric Flair tagged with Eugene. Matt Hardy versus Kane for Lita. And then Chris Jericho versus Batista. Batista was kind of green still at this point, so he wasn't at his best. You had Randy Orton versus Edge, which was a great match. And then you had Chris Benoit versus Triple H, which was okay. It wasn't the best. Triple H doesn't really work well with Chris Benoit, but still, it's an okay pay-per-view. Then we have SummerSlam 2004. This was pretty solid. Diva Dodgeball, which is what they kind of did at the time. Rey Mysterio, Paul London, and Billy Kidman. I was surprised, it's been a while since I've seen this, that Billy Kidman was even still wrestling at this point. Versus Spike Dudley, Bubba Ray Dudley, and Devon Dudley. So now they've got the Dudleys back together, obviously. Then you have Edge, Batista, and Chris Jericho. Don't remember much about that match. Booker T versus John Cena was a solid series of matches. I like how they tried to go back to that best of 5 or best of 7 series that WCW used to do. And then, Matt Hardy versus Kane. Lita marries the winner. That whole storyline. Triple H versus Eugene. Now Triple H is mad that Eugene's even around Evolution, so then you've got Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle. That's always a solid match. JBL versus The Undertaker. This kind of cemented JBL as a main eventer, in my opinion. And then you got Chris Benoit versus Randy Orton. That was a phenomenal match between Benoit and Randy Orton. Benoit doesn't work well with Triple H, but this match was phenomenal. And I love that Randy Orton actually won the match as well. So, fantastic match there. Just these two matches alone make this pay-per-view worth watching. Then we have Unforgiven 2004. Was a pretty average pay-per-view. You had Trish Stratus versus Victoria. Solid match, again, just like they had at Survivor Series 2002. But see, this is where it gets weird. You got Benoit and William Regal versus Batista and Flair. You know why Batista and Flair are together with Evolution, but the other pairing is just kind of random. And then you get La Resistance versus Rhino and Tajiri. Kind of makes me think that they weren't really building up things very well here. Chris Jericho versus Christian in a ladder match for the Intercontinental title. It's kind of a rematch from the previous year's Unforgiven, only without RVD. Shawn Michaels versus Kane was okay. And then Randy Orton versus Triple H. Great story. I think they kind of, I don't know, it just kind of seemed to fall flat. It worked better with the Batista when Batista broke away from Evolution, but the Randy Orton one, at least at first, kind of fell flat. Because they kind of ended up making him go back to be heel eventually, so. Then we have No Mercy 2004. At this point, SmackDown's pay-per-views are a little bit more solid, but they're lesser names as far as match quality goes. Spike Dudley versus Nunzio. They're still trying to make the Cruiserweight title mean something, but it's starting to, as you see with the two people that are in the match, not mean as much. Then you got Rico, Charlie Haas, and Miss Jackie versus the Dudley Boys and Dawn Marie. I'm not exactly sure of the storyline behind that. And then you got Kenzo Suzuki and Rene Dupree versus Rey Mysterio and RVD. Again, random tag teams. Paul London and Billy Kidman again. Billy Kidman still wrestling, wow. Booker T and John Cena again for the U.S. title. Eddie Guerrero versus Luther Reigns. You know, I'm sure it was Eddie Guerrero trying to polish a turd there. Make something out of nothing. Big Show versus Kurt Angle was a solid match. And then you got JBL and Undertaker again in a last ride match for the title. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember what a last ride match was. If you do remember, leave a comment down below, so I'd love to be reminded of what that kind of match was. But it's okay pay-per-view. Then we have Taboo Tuesday 2004. This was the first kind of pay-per-view where the fans voted what, you know, match stipulations, opponents, things like that. I kind of like that idea. Whether it was actually random is, I don't know. But La Resistance versus Edge and Chris Benoit. You know, that's who the fans wanted to see face La Resistance for the titles, because they were a great tag team back in the day. So that was a pretty solid match. And then Fulfill Your Fantasy, you know, schoolgirl outfits. You know, they just had to choose what kind of outfits they wanted the Divas to wear for that. So that was nothing really. Christy Hemme and Carmella in a lingerie pillow fight. You know, that's what they voted for also. They voted for Shelton Benjamin to get another shot at the title for the Intercontinental title here. Kane and Gene Snitsky in a steel chain match. You know, fans voted the stipulation for that match. Randy Orton versus Ric Flair in a steel cage, another one where the fans voted the stipulation. Eugene versus Eric Bischoff was a hilarious match to watch. Eric Bischoff was just kind of looking for a reason to shave his head. Triple H versus Shawn Michaels. At this point in time, everyone was still in love with Shawn Michaels, so he got, you know, it was between him, Edge, and Chris Benoit who would face Triple H for the title. Then they picked Shawn Michaels, which means that Edge and Benoit had to face La Resistance. But still, you know, if it was random, it was very well done. Then you've got Survivor Series 2004. At this point, Survivor Series, in a way, was kind of, after 2003, kind of fall downhill for a while, as far as being one of the tentpole pay-per-views of the year. You've got Trish Stratus and Lita. Always a solid match. Shelton Benjamin as the Intercontinental Champion versus Christian. Solid match. Undertaker versus Heidenreich. Again, Undertaker probably trying to polish a turd there. Eddie Guerrero, Big Show, Rob Van Dam, and John Cena versus Kurt Angle, Carlito, Mark Jindrak, and Luther Reigns. See, they're just throwing random people in there now because one team they like, the other team they don't give a shit about. But Fatal 4-Way, Spike Dudley versus Rey Mysterio versus Chavo versus Billy Kidman. That is surprising. You know, you're at now, maybe they haven't given up on the Cruiserweight division yet at this point. Randy Orton, Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, and Maven versus Triple H, Edge, Batista, and Gene Snitsky. At least those are names that people actually care about. Then you got JBL versus Booker T, which wasn't good. They don't work well together at all. But solid pay-per-view, but not the Survivor Series of the previous 2 years. Then we have Armageddon, which at this point kind of had fallen by the wayside as well. The last pay-per-view of the year is usually never the best. But, you know, Miss Jackie versus Dawn Marie. Dixie Dogfight. Daniel Puder versus Mike Mizanin. You know, tough enough. You know, so 2 matches right in a row where people didn't care. Then you followed up with Spike Dudley versus Funaki. And now they've given up on the Cruiserweight division. Then you've got RVD and Rey Mysterio versus Kenzo Suzuki and Rene Dupree. I guess you can kind of say that's a match people care about, but 3 out of 4 matches that people care about is not good. 3-on-1 handicap match, Big Show versus Luther Reigns, Mark Jindrak, and Kurt Angle is kind of ludicrous, but, you know, again, they're trying to polish some turds there. John Cena versus Jesus. for the United States title. Interesting. Then you got JBL, Undertaker, Eddie Guerrero, and Booker T in a fatal 4-way match. Wasn't the greatest, you know. JBL only had chemistry with certain people, and Booker T just wasn't one of them, unfortunately. So, average pay-per-view, maybe below average. Then we have New Year's Revolution. Very solid pay-per-view. I really enjoyed this pay-per-view. Muhammad Hassan versus Jerry Lawler. You know, I'm kind of disappointed that, you know, people got offended by the Muhammad Hassan character. I thought he had potential to be one of the best heels at the time. But I guess the optics just made him look bad. William Regal and Eugene versus Christian and Tyson Tomko. Okay match. Lita versus Trish Stratus. Again, always solid. Shelton Benjamin versus Maven was actually a solid match. You know, you got Kane and Gene Snitsky again. You can just tell that the Raw roster was just stacked with names, as to where SmackDown seemed to be more developmental. I guess SmackDown was supposed to be kind of the NXT of the time. But yeah, Triple H versus Batista versus Edge versus Randy Orton versus Chris Jericho versus Chris Benoit, with Shawn Michaels as the referee. Fantastic, fantastic match. I loved how they were teasing Batista turning on Triple H the whole pay-per-view, and Triple H being all nervous. That's why, like, 2005 here, they handled Batista leaving Evolution a lot better than they handled Randy Orton leaving Evolution. Then you go to the Royal Rumble, 2005. You know, Shawn Michaels versus Edge was a solid match. Undertaker versus Heidenreich. God, they keep trying to polish those turds. JBL, Kurt Angle, and Big Show was actually a solid triple threat match. Then you got Triple H and Randy Orton continuing that storyline. And then with the Rumble, they were again teasing Batista turning on Triple H and saying that, oh, you should win and go after the SmackDown Championship and all that. But definitely worth watching. I love Royal Rumble pay-per-views, even if you aren't a fan of the stories of what's going on at that point. Then you've got No Way Out 2004. Yeah, and see, you can just tell the difference in the rosters too, like which one's loaded and which one's not. But yeah, Funaki, Paul London, and Shannon Moore versus Akio, Spike Dudley, and Chavo Guerrero. You know, that was... They're grasping the straws here. And then you got Booker T versus Heinrich, which was horrible. And then you got the Bashams, which I thought were a promising young tag team, versus Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero. You got Undertaker and Luther Reigns. God, they are trying to polish some of those turds still. John Cena and Kurt Angle. You know, great match. JBL and Big Show in a barbed wire steel cage match was only average. You know, JBL was average and Big Show wasn't good enough to carry JBL, so it kind of fell flat. Then we have WrestleMania 21, which is one of my favorite WrestleManias. Solid card up and down. Every match was fantastic. Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero, they always have fantastic matches back to their WCW days. The first ever Money in the Bank ladder match was absolutely phenomenal to watch. The crowd was super into it. Undertaker versus Randy Orton. See, this is where they already turned Randy Orton heel again. And now he's facing The Undertaker at WrestleMania. They put on a very good match, though. Trish Stratus versus Christy Hemme. Christy Hemme couldn't wrestle, so it wasn't very good. Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle was a wrestling clinic. Probably one of the better matches of this card. Stone Cold on Piper's Pit. Of course, people went bananas for that. Big Show versus Akebono was kind of a publicity match, I think, because Akebono at the time was like the sumo world champion or something like that. JBL versus John Cena was way better than I thought it would be. You know, the kickoff to the John Cena era. And in the same night, I'm surprised they did it in the same night, Batista's solo career got rocketed off too against Triple H. So very big turning point for WWE at the time, going with the younger talent as the champions. Definitely check this one out if you haven't seen it before. Then we have Backlash 2005. You know, tag team turmoil match. Doesn't say what the tag teams were. But then you had Kane versus Viscera. They were just looking for something for Kane to do, I think. So, look, another big man. And unfortunately, Viscera was never a really good wrestler. Chris Benoit and Edge in a last man standing match. Solid match. Shelton Benjamin and Chris Jericho was okay. You know, Chris Jericho and him didn't work very well together. And Chris Jericho usually works well with everyone. Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan versus Muhammad Hassan and Daivari. Like I said, I loved the Muhammad Hassan character. It's a shame that it didn't get farther than it did. And then you had Batista and Triple H, a rematch from WrestleMania. And it was a fantastic match, just like WrestleMania. So definitely worth checking out. Then we have Judgment Day 2005. You know, now it's the kickoff of the other brand with John Cena. Paul London and Chavo Guerrero, solid match. Eminem, a new tag team with Johnny Nitro and Joey Mercury versus Hardcore Holly and Charlie Haas. So, Orlando Jordan, a lot of potential, but horrible on the mic versus Heidenreich. So that's just a recipe for disaster right there. Big Show and Carlito. I love the Carlito character. They just never seem to really know what to do with him. Booker T versus Kurt Angle was a solid match. Booker T turned heel at this point. Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero. Again, rematch from WrestleMania. Fantastic match. And then you got John Cena and JBL, who seem to work very, very well together. And so all in all, a very solid pay-per-view. Then we have the Raws, SmackDown, Sunday Night Heat, and Velocity. You know, I was trying to record all of them again before the network. Then we have ECW One Night Stand 2005. They were trying to introduce a third brand here, kind of teasing it, but not sure if they wanted to do it yet. The following year they would. But it was an okay pay-per-view. The matches weren't very great. But, you know, the whole storyline behind the entire pay-per-view is what made it interesting. Because Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman way past their prime versus Bubba and Devon. Eddie Guerrero versus Chris Benoit is always a classic. Super Crazy, Tajiri, and Little Guido was okay. Rey Mysterio and Psychosis was fun to watch just because it's a flashback to the WCW days. And then Lance Storm versus Chris Jericho was okay. So not the greatest pay-per-view. Then we have Vengeance 2005. Triple H's last chance to get his belt back. Christy Hemme and Victoria. Christy Hemme can't wrestle. And you got a rematch, Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle. You know, classic match. Kane and Edge. You know, again, now they're fighting over Lita again. And then you got Carlito versus Shelton Benjamin. They drafted Carlito to Raw. So now they actually are maybe going to start to use him here. And then they drafted John Cena to Raw. So you had John Cena versus Christian versus Chris Jericho for the WWE title, which was a pretty solid match. And then for the world title, you had Batista and Triple H. And shortly after this, Batista would be drafted to SmackDown. But yeah, because at first it was interesting. Like, people didn't know what was going to go on because both world titles were on the same brand. So made it very interesting storyline-wise. And then finally, again, we have our Raws, SmackDowns, Velocities, and Sunday Night Heats again. But that will do it for this video. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe. Your support is much appreciated. I'm also on Letterboxd. The link is over in my channel profile. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time.